Yes, I challenge you. You pigeon-hearted, pusillanimous weasel. Academic weasel. Fraud. So I've always wanted to reply to this video that Ben Shapiro, he put forward, this video where he's talking about Islam and Muslims, and he's trying to represent Muslims in a certain way. He hastily generalizes in a really unacademic way. And we have to think about what his motivations are with this kind of hasty generalization. But before we do so, let's take a look at actually some of the claims that he's making. First of all, as we can see in this video, he speaks about the Old Testament and the New Testament, and when he speaks about people who believe in these things, he acknowledges that there are violent passages, he says, in those books, but he says,
there's plenty of violent material in the Old and New Testaments. Hey, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I read the Old Testament a lot. But believers in those particular texts are not currently ramming airliners into towers or beheading journalists or mutilating female genitalia.
So why mention these examples? Is it because you're trying to otherize or associate Muslims with particular acts? It's clear here that those three examples are carefully chosen by yourself and actually, funny enough, not even generalizable to Muslims. Let's take your third example, for example. You talk about female genital mutilation. Well, there is no evidence whatsoever that only Muslim countries practice this act. For example, Ethiopia, East Africa, many of those populations are majority Christian populations, yet the act is very much, or the practice of female genital mutilation is very much rampant. In fact, one of the books I've written called Fifth Wave Feminism, I dedicate an entire chapter on these kinds of acts, practices, and how they're committed in the Western world. Like, for example, if you look at the WHO definition of what is in fact considered female genital mutilation, it would be things like labiaplasty. Why is that not considered? And by the way, labiaplasty and clitoridectomies, these kinds of things are done right here in the West, and they're done at an alarming rate, more so than probably any other place in the world. So why is that not referred to as female genital mutilation? And has that got anything to do with Muslims? No, it's got nothing to do with Muslims. Even the piercing of vagina is referred to as a kind of mutilation by the WHO standard. If we take, once again, that measure, what would we say? That happens more in the West, or does that happen more in the East? So once again, I think you're trying to create an image. You're trying to create a picture of a peculiar Muslim, right? And it's a very failed image, because when we fact check some of the stuff that you're saying quickly, right? As we're going to find out when we go through this one by one, bit by bit, piece by piece, then everything, like a stack of cards, breaks down in front of your very face. Let's take a look at the next thing that you say. So you say that, and this is so important because you run with this, okay? And in fact, I would go as far as to say is the majority of your video is based on this faulty and unrecognized definition, which you don't even do a good job in defining.
Radical beliefs are a lot broader than terrorists, and anybody who argues otherwise is being naive or foolish or disingenuous.
But defining what radical beliefs are not is not defining what they are. So by saying radical beliefs are much wider than terrorism, what you're free to do, as we're going to see in this video, is basically define a multiplicity of things, all radical beliefs. But why should we accept your chosen definition? In fact, in the literature, in the political science literature, when we read the works of Atran or Pape or Sageman or any of this, they don't agree with you in terms of that definition. When we talk about the process of radicalization, we're not talking about someone who, for example, as we're going to come to see with your kind of pseudo definitions, that believes in or enacts kind of Sharia law. Who agrees with this definition? It's not something which is unanimous in the literature by any means. So you start with this faulty definition, and then you proceed in a way which builds your faulty castle, or your castle on a thin air. You're building an argument on a faulty premise. And that's what we're going to expose today.
Indonesia is the world's most populous Muslim country. It's got almost 205 million Muslims living there. And 70% blamed the United States, Israel, or somebody else for 9/11. So, you make that calculation, it's about 143 million people who are radicalized. You scared yet? We're just getting started.
So if it's true that someone who blames the US, Israel, or someone else for 9/11 is a radical, as you're alluding to here, or you're trying to suggest here, then all of those families whose family member was killed on 9/11, who are part of the truth movements in the United States and all those kind of things, are you willing to come out and say that they're radicals as well? Well, in fact, you'd have to do that. Come out and say that they are radicals. Those people in America, part of the truth movement, that they're all radicals, if that's what your definition entails.
Bangladesh. Another 82% want Sharia to be the official law of the country. Okay, Egypt, 80 million Muslims. According to that same 2009 poll, it showed that 65% want strict Sharia law in every Islamic country.
The second aspect, strict support for Sharia law. So I want to know, what exactly about Sharia law do you think makes someone a radical? Because if you're saying Sharia law makes someone a radical, what exactly? Now, I am going to assume that you're going to say the punitive laws, because that's the most controversial aspect of Sharia law. Now, I want you to answer me a question. If people believe the punitive and penal laws of Islam, and that makes them a radical, then what do you say of Orthodox Jews who read Exodus chapter 20, who read Leviticus chapter 20, who read 1 Samuel 15:3, and you can check those references in your own time, in the book of Numbers chapter 30 verse 8, check those references in your own time. What about those individuals who believe in those things? They believe in the capital punishment for murder, for adultery, In fact, let me tell you, Ben. Let me tell you something, Ben. Listen to me and look at me. I'm willing to say that all of the punitive laws that are mentioned classically in the text, the primary text of Islam, and subsequently mentioned by medieval scholars, for example, in classical jurisprudential texts, that they're also mentioned more severely, yes, more severely in the halakhic texts of the Jewish Orthodox Jews. So can you now say that they are radicals? All of those Orthodox Jews who believe word for word, letter for letter, the biblical discourse as it relates to penal laws, you would probably come back and say, well, hold on. That's what it says in the book, but in terms of implementation, there's a difference. And we say the same thing. We're not going around saying, well, let's go cut everyone's hands off and go and do these things which are penal laws. These things, as we know, have a complex discussion of how they are implemented in the modern world. We're not saying let's go and do a killing spree or do a murder this and capital punishments. No, there's a complex discussion. Muslim scholars are having it, just like Jewish scholars are having it. And there's a spectrum of different opinion on how implementation can be done, if it is at all done in Muslim lands. So if this makes Muslims radicals, then surely it should be able to make Orthodox Jews radicals as well, because I say this again, almost all of the punitive laws, almost all of the penal laws are iterated in the Old Testament. Almost all of them. In fact, more of them are there. More of them are there. So that's what you tried to skip in the beginning of the video, didn't you? Try to weasel from that one. Try to scramble from that one. Try to squirm from that one. Try to run away from that one. Oh, there's violent passages in the Old Testament. Do you not think that some of these individuals who believe in those violent passages could have a propensity to be inspired, as they were historically, contemporaneously, to do any act of violence? Like the Irgun, who killed 91 individuals, innocent individuals in the King Solomon Hotel, who were a Jewish terrorist group, yes, who then became basically the government. For all intents and purposes, the Lukid party is now an extension from this terrorist organization. Now you keep mentioning Osama bin Laden in your video,
and almost 70% said that they had positive or mixed feelings about bin Laden.
Now imagine Begin, who wrote this book called The Revolt. He himself became the Prime Minister of Israel. Now, if that is the case, now you can imagine after Osama bin Laden has committed all of his attacks, he becomes the Prime Minister of some country, and he has an allied relationship with the West. So please don't throw stones when you live in a glass house. Do you not know your history? And do you not know your religious book? You claim you're an Orthodox Jew, but what exactly are you advocating in terms of belief?
Nigeria, 75.7 million Muslims live there. 71% favor Sharia law. That's 53.7 million people. Iran, 74.8 million Muslims. 83% favor implementation of Sharia law as of last year.
So this is what he does throughout the video. He looks at all the countries that believe in a strict, or the majority of population believe in a strict compliance to Sharia law, and he labels them as radical. But of course, he wouldn't have the same attitude to Orthodox Jews who believe in very similar things. So I want to know, first of all, who peer-reviewed your definition of radicalism? Who peer-reviewed it? Because when I was looking in the academic literature, I didn't find your pseudo-definition of radicalism. It doesn't actually exist. Number two, why are you not applying the same standards on the Orthodox Jewish community, if that's what radicalism entails? So it seems like your presupposition is a false one, and therefore your understanding is a problematic one.
Bangladesh. And 2/3 said honor killings of women can sometimes be justified. Honor killings.
Now, I looked at Pew Research to see exactly what they're talking about. And what, in fact, they're talking about... In fact, let me give you one example. Indonesia says males... has an honor killing section, talks about the capital punishment for a certain crime. It says males, for example, 82% believed that they would be eligible for honor killings, and also 82% of females. So it's exactly the same. It's not a female-specific issue. You're saying they believe in female honor killings. But if we look at the biggest population of Muslims in the world, Indonesia, as an example, but many of them are the same, those who believe in such capital punishments usually believe in it for both sexes. Now, what are we talking about when they say this? Are they talking about something which is judicial, so a capital punishment for a certain kind of crime, or are we talking about vigilantism? Are we talking? And these are very important nuances. You can't just skip by themselves. They believe in honor killings for women, but do they believe in? I mean, look at Indonesia. They believe in 82% of them believe in honor killing for so-called honor killing for women, but also for men. So what are they talking about when they say this? And do they all mean the same thing when they say these things? These are nuances which are very important. So there's a book called What a Billion Muslims Think, okay? And there's a survey of 50,000 people, Muslim people, across I don't know how many countries. John Esposito and Dalia Mogahed were part of this project. And when we look at the amount of Muslims who actually believe in terrorism and killing innocent people and civilians and stuff, you'll find it's a marginal number. If you look at pages 97 to 98 of the book, the high 90s of people, the percentage of high 90% believe that that is a despicable crime and horrendous and so on and so forth. Now we know, you have to remember something. The Muslim community is like 1.8 billion. Now in 2020, the Jewish community is not even 1% of that. So it's not a like for like, I'm afraid. If even 1% of the Muslim community becomes radicalized in a properly definitional sense, in a violent sense, it will have massive ramifications. It's true. And we do have a problem to deal with. We're not denying this. As the Muslim community, we have to talk about these things, about the takfiri movements, about those radical movements, about those repugnant movements, the monstrous crimes that they commit, and how to theologically remedy what they're doing, politically remedy what they're doing, and ideologically remedy what they're doing. But it's not fair for someone like you to come up and misrepresent an entire people, religious community, by hastily generalizing and giving false definitions and not applying the same standards of radicalization to one group of people rather than others. I want to tell you something. Yes, I've got something in my hand. This is an unpublished paper that I wrote back in 2014. When I was doing one of my postgraduates. In fact, I was in the Leo Baeck Institute, which is it's a Jewish institute, as you probably, well, you should know. Let me tell you something. I was doing work to see the extent of Jewish racism. And in fact, I might publish this because when I went on the Peace Index website, it seems to me that they're not working anymore. But this was one of the most robust organizations that were teaming up with Tel Aviv University. I remember referencing them now in this. And I was looking at the extent of the problem of racism in the Jewish community. Now look at this. I want to show you something, yes? I want you to know something. Look at the amount of racism you have in the Israeli Jewish community. According to Peace Index survey conducted in 2012, some 65.2% of Israeli Jews were either moderately or greatly disturbed that there were foreign workers who came from countries like Sudan and Eritrea. So we're talking about greatly 40.5%. That they had foreign neighbors who came from Eritrea, Sudan and Eritrea. In particular, these are two black countries, as you know. Now, I've never seen you come out and talk about the clear racism in Israel. All we've seen with you is you attacking the Black Rights Movement, or Black Rights Matter movement. But we haven't seen from you attack any Jewish anti-black sentiments, which we can see here with these survey data. Or this survey data is quite rampant. Same, likewise, as we know with your own comment, your anti-Arab comment, when you're saying that Jews like to build things and Arabs like to bomb crap or something like this when you were on Andrew O'Neill's show, 50% of Jews would not live in the same building as Arabs, and the number 50% said they would encourage their Arab neighbors to emigrate to another land. What kind of numbers are these? What kind of things are these? Well, I don't see. Is that radicalism? I want to ask you a question actually. Is that racism? Can we say that the majority, based on this data here, which conveniently the website is not working right now, the Peace Index website, because people are using it like me to prove certain things or to make certain claims. But could I say? I've got this. Don't worry. I've taken screenshots and I'm going to show it to you right now. But when I say this, can we generalize the Jewish community in Israel as a racist community by and large? And if this is something we can say, why don't you start doing work against this, using your platform, using your social media influence, instead of continually attacking black people, or the Black Rights Movement? You don't want to admit even that the guy who killed George Floyd was doing so for racial reasons, and you were at one point hesitant on the fact that should he be prosecuted or not for murder. You were questioning this at one point. I'm not sure if you've changed your mind. But I want to ask you a genuine question. I mean, are you affected by this kind of thing? Because you yourself came up with racist rhetoric. So why not be open and honest? If we're going to be academic about these things, then we're going to be open and honest. Yes, we have a problem within Muslim communities, but not all Muslim communities are the same. We're talking about, like you said, 50 countries with Muslim majority populations. We're talking about, according to Pew, that you like to quote, a religious population that in the end of the century will amount to 1/3 of the world's population. And you want to generalize those. That's 1/3, 1 out of every 3. You can't even compare them with Jewish people. They're like, 30 million people worldwide. There's more people in Morocco than there are Jews in the world. So, I mean, please, be fair. So the reason why you only want to deal with college students, young ones, untrained ones, little ones, weak ones, in uneven situations and settings, is because you're pusillanimous. What did you say? I said you're a pusillanimous, timorous, pusillanimous, ultra-crepidarian, dilettante, and you don't want to face someone who can put you in your place. Yes, I challenge you. You pigeon-hearted, pusillanimous weasel. Academic weasel. Fraud. You're a fraud. You're a fraud. And I put you in your place. I know you think, damn, this guy's... I was hoping I'd get away with it. If it wasn't for those meddling kids.
And it would have been mine if it hadn't been for those meddling kids.
But you know what? You're finished. You're finished. You're finished. You're finished. And you wouldn't come and dare even be in the same proximity as me. And I know you know that. And that's all I have to say on the matter. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Now that we've dealt with this of the pusillanimous kind, I challenge you to a discussion on those matters. You see, even this. I challenge you pusillanimous. Yes, I challenge you. You You're pusillanimous. But I know you're shivering. Pigeon-hearted pusillanimous of the 3rd degree.